So this is my We Are Consciousness plan. This is the second time I've worked on this plan. The first go at it, I have on my blog. It's called Plan for We Are Consciousness. And I'll call this one probably Plan for We Are Consciousness Part 2 or something like that. Anyway, I was and have been inspired by this sense of sort of kinship with all of humanity in a divine way. And it's all through this feeling of we are here now. And it's sort of like experiencing Christ consciousness through the aspect of we, through the interpersonal. And it's really like a call to action. It's a call to transform yourself and to transform the world through the spirit of brotherhood and love, transcendent love, for all people on this planet. It's this is divine inspiration, and it's just compelled me to just create a plan to do it. How do you actually bring about the enlightenment of all human beings on this planet? And I've just been going through it, and it feels like the most right thing to do that I've ever felt in my life, and it's super motivating. I guess I gotta add that I feel like this energy, this we are spirit, it's sort of linked to I guess you would call ascended masters, like Jesus and Saint Germain and Buddha, all those guys, all those people. And I just want to stress again, this is one of the most real things I've ever felt, and it feels like an effort that has been ongoing for thousands of years, is a part of probably the Buddha and Jesus and perhaps Muhammad. All these different people, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, they're all a part of the same we are consciousness awakening. That's just one way to call it, but that's the way that feels most real to me, and it's all a part of this spirit of liberating humankind. And it's tapping into the same consciousness, the same universal awareness and righteousness. All these different people throughout the last at least 2,000 or 3,000 years, 4,000 years, they've all been tapping into the same awareness, the same motivation, and it's we are consciousness, it's Christ consciousness, it's liberation consciousness. It's all the same consciousness that they've been tapping into. And I think it's something that I've been searching for. It's just the good, plain and simple. It's the good, but it's the good from an awakened mind, awakened heart perspective. That's where I'm coming at it right now. And yeah, it's super exciting. It just feels like totally wholesome and totally transcendent of dogma. Just real. So anyway, now that I've sort of given the intro, I want to go over the second input that I've made towards this plan, thinking about it. And so on the first page, you can see down there in the picture, it's the first one. It says you basically got to cover all the bases, hit every aspect of life. So what this means is, it's not just about the environment. It's not just about mental health. It's not just about physical health. It's not just about unifying people through their religions and beliefs. It's all of these things together. You've got to take care of the food you're eating, the resources you're using. Are they sustainable? Is your government, is it wholesome? Are people healthy mentally and physically? Is education, is it worthy? Are your businesses wholesome as well? Are they fair? Are they trying to cheat people? All the different factors of life, they all have to be brought to a level of consciousness, and that's the first box I have. And on the left, in these boxes, these are inspired thoughts that have to do sort of with the sections that they're next to. And so that first one is bring everything we do to Christ consciousness. And so we've got all these different dimensions, and I wrote down some of them. I sort of tried to cover all the bases. These are just, it's one way of looking at it. It's not entirely complete. That it says clean, wholesome, and sustainable. CWS. I don't think you need, the clean, and you could probably just say wholesome, but this is just what I wrote. Clean, wholesome, and sustainable food, clean, wholesome, and sustainable water, clean, wholesome, and sustainable use of materials, government, individual, society, and business. So all these things have to be brought to a level of enlightenment of the mind and of the heart. And the box below the first box says every aspect is interdependent with every other factor. So none of these dimensions, like sustainable food or sustainable water, none of them are separate from each other. They all interdependent. In order to have sustainable food, you need to have sustainable individuals, sustainable societies, and a sustainable government, and a sustainable use of materials. Because if you're not using your resources sustainably, then you could run out with things you need to produce the food. Anyway, so every one of these aspects is dependent on the others, which is why you need to take care of all of them at the same time. Because you can only reach the enlightenment through the simultaneous upholding of each of these factors to that level of Christ consciousness. And so below these described dimensions, it says, figure out how to get these aspects to function at a level of Christ consciousness. So that's what you're trying to do. How do you actually practically go about having wholesome food production and food use? How do you go about having wholesome water? How do you go about getting wholesome and sustainable use of your resources and sustainable manufacturing, wholesome manufacturing? How do you have wholesome government? Like, it's cool to think about this, but in order to do it, you've got to do it. You've got to know how to do it, and you've got to break it down and figure it out. This is at least one way to do it, is to get really specific with the individual processes, and then piece by piece elevating them and working on them to get them to sustain Christ consciousness throughout society. So, under figure out how to do this, the first bullet is you have to establish a great deal of security, inclusion, and awareness. And so, if you follow the dotted line, I have elaborated on this, and it says, have a great deal of wealth in communities, wealth and prosperity. And so, if you have wealth in your communities and people are employed and they have good food, they have health care, they're not going to be so worried about survival. They're going to be more open to new ideas. They're going to be more open to listening to people who are talking about things that I'm talking about. And below that I have food security. So, wealth you could also see, I guess, as a wealth of health. And so food security would be having localized food production largely, I think, and had a little brain fart right there. I had to go over my writing and make sure I understood everything that I wrote. So anyway, we're on food security. So why is security important? Because if you don't have your bottom base, your root base covered of just basic security, then people aren't gonna want to or be able to live at this high level of being. It's going to be chaos if people don't have food, if they don't have jobs. So you got to take care of the base, which is, housing, food, employment, stuff like that, health, the basic things, so that you have a foundation to establish, the heart and mind of Christ consciousness. The base is just basic security, and it's just as important. So, food security, if you have most of your food produced locally in a sustainable way, in a way that is adapted to climate change, then your community is going to know that regardless of what happens, they're going to have food. That's peace of mind. That's order. That's maintaining the base of Christ consciousness. So again, localized food production, sustainable food production, and food production in a way that is maintained throughout climate change. So the people know that they've got that security covered. They know they're going to have food, and they know it's going to be distributed fairly. And this is going to require the use of newer technologies. And you have to localize food production, and you also have to localize manufacturing. The same idea. Not only you have more of your people working because you have your manufacturing in your community, but you know that you can make the things you need for the basics. You can make stuff for transportation, for cars. You can make things for your homes, windows, plumbing. You can make all of your communication materials, your telephone lines, your satellites, your cell towers. You can build all of this essential stuff in your own community. So regardless of what happens, you got that base covered. And so if you can localize this in all communities to a fair extent, then you can really increase the security of those communities, and you can decrease costs because you don't have to get it shipped. And yeah. So localized manufacturing and localized food production. And again, this localized manufacturing will require probably a good amount of scientific and tech development. And I was thinking for the manufacturing, you could develop resources that could be made from materials that are common all over the world, so that instead of having to develop the use of a certain material for a certain area and having to do that in every single area, and have like all these different resources that are developed into, say, a base kind of metal or a base kind of plastic that could be used for manufacturing, you instead say, okay, what are the main materials that are found all over the world? What are the most common ones? Let's develop these, and then we'll have to do the least amount of research and development to have the maximum creation of a localized manufacturing. So say there's some kind of resource that's found in 40% of the world. You develop that resource into metals and plastics that can be used for all kinds of manufacturing of essential products that you need in your communities. And okay, and so that sort of has to do with localized production and localized security. And the next part is better job opportunities. You've got to have some way of people either being employed with good jobs that have good wages and good health care, good benefits. You've got to have some way to provide financial and health security to people. And I think that goes hand in hand with having better education for all ages and all demographics. Better education means better potential for better jobs, which is better security. And it also means better workers, more intelligent people. And it also means people that are more aware. You could teach, how to understand your feelings in school. You could teach people to be present in school. You could teach people to be mindful in school. You could teach people to be holistic in school. These are all things we can do, and the education from day one is hugely important in the process of bringing about enlightenment on our planet. We can avoid so much negativity that is conditioned into us through rearing and through education, just simply by changing the way we educate children. Educate them in a more holistic way, so there's less stress, there's less resistance, there's more inclusion and holistic development and individualized development of people, because we're not all the same. We're not all going to fit into one streamlined education system. We all have unique skills, unique minds, unique ways of learning, and unique things that we can do. Yeah. And so part of this is localized training programs for local jobs. And this would start in probably elementary schools. You would have kids that could, if they decided to, do more trade stuff, they could get specialized education in, installing solar panels, or being an electrician, or being a plumber, or working on cars, or working on engines, These are things kids could learn, and anyone could learn. And it would make it so that there's more pathways in education for kids to pursue. And it would be paired with local businesses too. So they would get more support, and the kids would get more job experience. Okay, and the next detail is instilling. Oh, and this is all on the next page. When I got to education, that's all on the next page. So that's the next picture. And the next detail is instilling more community awareness and community responsibility. In the United States, it feels like there's this huge gap between us, like this sort of chaotic, gray, mentally ill gap between people. It feels like we don't have strong communities. I'm sure there's tons out there, but it just feels like we're sort of fragmented. And we suffer because of this. And it's because we're not getting enough emotional support and feelings of inclusion. That's part of it, but it's also because we're not taking care of our community. We have hearts to do it, and people do care, but we don't really know how. We don't feel comfortable doing it. There aren't these like existing pathways that are easy to see to get